Today is day 8 of the Karen Reed trial. I'm exhausted. I have a huge mountain of laundry here that I have to fold. I have a ton of stuff to do. I want to try to keep this as brief as possible, but if there's anything that you think is very important that I missed, put it in the comments and we can chat it out. Today, Alan Jackson gets started with Jen McCabe again on the questioning about who she called at 4:53 a.m. the morning of the 29th after she talked to Karen Reed and learned that John was missing. The first person she called was Julie Albert, and then she called Tom Beatty, and that's what she had testified to in the previous hearings. Today there's a little bombshell, and Alan Jackson says, but you also called over to 34 Fairview. And apparently that's in the phone records, but she's never testified to it. This is just coming out. But she did call her sister Nicole Albert at 5:07 a.m., and it says that there was a call for 38 seconds. So that means she potentially talked to her sister for 38 seconds. And she said, "You're making it sound like something nefarious happened with my sister." And he jumps on that. Like, why did you use the word nefarious? I'm not saying that. Like, why would you bring up that word? And she said, you're making it sound like there was something. There was nothing there. I never spoke to my sister that morning. That's a big deal, though, because she could have given them a heads up that they were coming over there. They still didn't come out on the lawn when John O'Keefe's body was found. So I don't know if that's true, but we'll see who believes who. The next thing was there was a bunch of text messages between Nicole and Jen. A lot of those are read out loud in court by Alan Jackson. They look like this. This one's from Jen. She is giving basically a lot of the information that she is overhearing in Carrie Roberts' testimony to her sister, and then later on in group chats to her husband, her brother-in-law, Brian Albert. So Alan Jackson wants to kind of set the scene that, like, you all were colluding together. You were listening in on witness questioning with interviews with the police, and you were passing that information along within your circle. In the last trial, we kind of had a bombshell and learned that there was this group text between Matt and Jen McCabe and Brian Albert and Nicole Albert, the four of them talking. And apparently one day reporters were at D&E Pizza. So there's a text from Matt McCabe, and this was on February 1st. And he says, eating, I assume, ask Chris to ask some questions. So he wants Chris to inquire with the reporters, like, hey, what's going on? And then he says, tell them the guy never went in the house. So I remember last trial, this was the big bombshell. First of all, a fallen Boston police officer, also known as the guy. You guys were supposed to be friends. John O'Keefe was your friend. Why are you going to call him the guy? After this text, Brian Albert responds, exactly. Not the wording that I would have used if I was, mourning the death of this person that was found on the front lawn. More text messages get read between Matt and in the group, and from Matt about Carrie, this girl could write a book nonstop. I guess he was overhearing her interviews. And then a few other text messages later, she's telling them everything. Jen could hear bits and pieces of Carrie's interviews. Jackson is hinting again that they're all colluding. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but then they start talking about the location data being brought up for Jen McCabe's phone. Apparently it's brought up that she went to Michael Lank's house, who is the police detective, because that came up in the location data. She never testified to it. So that's kind of a big deal. There's like a 10-page document that they enter into evidence. And that's when they learned that she actually went to one Meadows. This was all on January 30th. At 12:19, she went over there at first, left their house at 5:12. Then she went back to her house. Then she went to Sergeant Lank's house, or detective. I always do this. And then she went back home. She spent about 45 minutes there. So this was something that she was hiding. The next step was some phone calls that she had between her and Michael Proctor. I put in my notes, waste of time. I think that Jackson totally fumbled this. Basically, they talked 14 times between January 29th to March 29th. And in another interview, she told Tully that she had never met Proctor before, but they did meet on January 29th when they had an in-person interview. Most of their communication happened, though, with these phone calls. I do have to point out that Jen McCabe is very pleasant on direct exam with Hank Brennan, and with Alan Jackson, she's a lot more resistant to answer his questions. She doesn't recall a lot of things, and it's really obvious here when we start talking about the Google search. She is very hesitant to agree to anything that he is saying. or make any definitive answer. She's saying that she doesn't recall making the Google searches. She doesn't know what time she made the Google searches. And then he's like, are you serious? You don't know what time you Googled how long to die in the cold? Like 2:27 a.m. Everyone knows that. It's been in so many reports. And she's saying, I don't know, like, it's a lot of I don't knows. And then he tries to pin her a little bit. He's like, are you aware that Carrie Roberts testified the other day and said that she did not overhear Jen ask you to Google how long to die in the cold? And she says, no, she was not aware of that, which would have been a big deal because of the witness sequestration order. You're not supposed to listen to other witness testimony. But she says, no, she wasn't aware of that. Some other important bits were that she is questioned about the morning of the 29th, and she made the 911 call there on the phone with 911, and 911 operators ask, is anybody there CPR certified? Can anybody help with CPR? And she says no. And he's asking her, can you think of anyone on Fairview that could have, done CPR, that was a first responder or could have attended? Anyone on the property? And he's trying to say, like, hey, your brother-in-law, Brian Albert. And she's like, I didn't think that I didn't want to go wake him. And my focus was on John. I didn't want to leave John. And then the EMTs arrived, and Carrie had asked me to take over the compression, so I didn't want to go bother them. Then he asked, like, how did you know your brother and your sister were okay? And she says that she knew they were sleeping. And he was like, how would you know? You never thought to go in the house and make sure they were okay? And she slips in that John was found outside the house. Miss Reed was saying she had hit him. And eventually there were taillight pieces found around him, which I don't know if any of that is actually true. Because at that moment, you really didn't know he had been hit by a car. You didn't find any taillight pieces. Had Karen said that she had hit him? So I don't think that's making sense. Now we're into some redirect from Brennan. Again, that calm, collected tone. He says, did any other neighbors come out of the house? She says no. Have you ever refused to speak to law enforcement? She says no. And then he starts reading text between Carrie and Jen McCabe saying how that they're so close. It was a lot of him reading the text emotionally. It didn't really connect for me, but the jurors might have really liked this. I do think it was a great redirect. I can read through some of the text messages, but I'm not going to because I want to go fast. Some of them actually were like, I talked to Peggy, I'm devastated for them. And just the two of them showing their friendship bond, I guess. Hank Brennan says there were no sirens in front of the house with the ambulance or the cruiser. She says, nope, none of the neighbors came out. And now we get into some more cross from Alan Jackson. He says they all had their lights on in front of the house. There was tons, of engines and all this stuff. And she's kind of like, well, they were more in front of 32 Fairview. And technically, like, on the police cam, like, yeah, maybe they were back a little bit, but they still didn't come out. He brings up the fact that she has turned away law enforcement when she was questioned before. That other agency, who we know is the FBI, but the jurors don't know that, had come to the house. She welcomed them into their house, but she did turn them away and said, I think we're done here, and she asked them to leave. She says she answered their questions and cleared up some of the misconceptions they had, and now they are no longer investigating, as you know. She kind of thought she hit him with a dig with that answer, but I think that landed more for the defense. And she also says that after they left, she hired counsel. And he doesn't ask anything else because I'm just kind of like, oh, that's when she hired her lawyers. Wow. That was the end of the questioning there with Jen. We're done with her. And then we have our next witness. We have Mr. Lally questioning. Her name is Hannah Knowles. She is a forensic scientist. She works at the Mass State Police Crime Lab. She did some of the toxicology reports, and I'm just going to go really quick. She's testifying about Karen's blood alcohol level. She did the serum conversion report in the retrograde extrapolation. She found out that the defendant's ethanol levels were 93 milligrams per deciliter, which we knew was done when she had her blood drawn at Good Samaritan. The blood draw was at 9:08 a.m., and they did a serum conversion test. That left us her blood alcohol level at that point being 0.078 to 0.092. They give a range. Then they work back on her BAC at 12:45, and they say her BAC was 0.14 to 0.28, which at the time of the incident at 12:45. So she was 0.14 to 0.28. And that's it for the day.